Okay, what is the next consideration for the need for social movement and social solutions for climate change? As you probably know, climate change has put the climate scientists into center stage because now climate change is being debated all the time. You cannot open any newspaper or media outlet of any kind or listen to the radio or TV anywhere in any language without getting some climate stories every single day. And still, there is a constant consternation that somehow more communication is needed. This makes me nervous, especially because many of the climate change stories by climate scientists tend to be very scary. They talk about how many things are going wrong, how many more people will die, how many corals are dying, how many fish are dying. And there is a real research now that shows that climate anxiety is increasing among the young and the old, people who worry that, in fact, the world is coming to an end. So the question then is, if technology cannot be the complete solution, then will it be just giving more information that'll make people jump up and solve the climate problem? Turns out that it's not that simple either. There are solutions that were found by more information being the key ingredient, like the SIDS, the sudden infant death syndrome, where for the longest time people didn't know that if they slept on their belly, they didn't have the strength in the neck to turn over or change positions, so they just suffocated to death. And this became a scary problem, and then it turned out that just making them sleep on the back was a simple solution. So in this case, information actually did solve the SIDS problem. Okay, but in the climate issue, there are many complications about what people think about climate change, what their opinion is, and what action they actually take. Okay, just to be a little bit of a devil's advocate, I would say almost all the scientists, in fact I don't know any climate scientist who lives a life that is completely consistent with our own story of how dangerous climate change is. Okay, which means we continue to express the opinion, which are good scientific honest opinions, but the action doesn't always follow. So here is a Pew Research Center's map, a little bit dated by now, but doesn't matter. The percent saying global climate change is a very serious problem. So you see the scale here, less serious to more serious. You clearly see that US has a different opinion and similar to many of these places like Russia. Australia is similar, South Africa for some reason, and so on. But developing countries like India and parts of South America, Brazil, and so on, have much more of a population that thinks that climate change is a serious problem. Again, as I said, this doesn't necessarily mean that these people are doing more for mitigating climate change. It's just that they are aware and they are willing to accept that it's a problem, whereas people here, for whatever reason, again, social scientists have theories about why this happens, specifically in the US versus Europe. You can see that the UK is more like the US. Maybe there is a strong connection between the two, right? Nonetheless, in general, countries or communities and societies that faced adversity and resource limitations in the past are supposed to be more accepting of problems and creating new norms and regulations and punishments and so on. Okay. Be that as may, looking a little bit more at the US, this is a paper in based on the US again, looks at the liberals and conservatives. So in the US, the opinion is split heavily between liberals and conservatives. Again, opinions, not necessarily action. That's something always good to remember. So it turns out that the perceived social consensus is an important factor shaping global warming beliefs, worries, and policy support, especially for conservatives. So you can see that conservatives, the people who believe in climate change as a serious agreement, drops when they think the social consensus is low, but it jumps up quite a bit, more than double in each case, about whether it's happening, whether it's human caused, whether it's a cause for worry, whether it needs carbon regulation, and so on. The numbers jump, right? So conservatives tend to have faith in social consensus. They do not necessarily believe scientific consensus. Okay? There is in fact misinformation about how many scientists agree or disagree, and you can easily confuse people by saying not every scientist agrees with climate change. Okay, this can be an issue in communication as well. Whereas among liberals, the difference between each of these issues about whether climate change is happening, whether it's human caused and it's a cause to worry, and whether it needs regulations, doesn't depend so much on whether there is a social consensus or not. They form their opinions independent of the social consensus. There is, of course, a small percentage who jump on the bandwagon of social consensus. Okay, this goes back to the rider and the elephant story we talked about before, and we will come back to before. The argument of Jonathan Haidt with the book Righteous Mind is that brains are hardwired in certain ways for liberals and conservatives. It's not a bad thing. They perceive things differently. So we have to be aware of that when you pitch the climate change problem, as well as when you propose regulations and solutions. Okay? So that's the information problem. And there is plenty of evidence that when people are relying on misinformation that confirms their bias or their belief already, they tend to throw away the facts that contradict their beliefs. So more information, in fact, does not help when people believe something already. So if there are people who believe that climate change is not happening, just giving them more information in a scientific way, you think this is science, how can you not believe it? But actually, that's not how it works. There's plenty of evidence that says people who are relying on misinformation to confirm their bias already that exists, that's called confirmation bias, tend to ignore facts. It's called rational ignorance, and so on and so forth. Okay, so more information is not necessarily a solution for climate change or bringing about social transformation. That's the main point.